more tempting everyone. Yeah, because we have friends some ideas we don't know how to actually find.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, can you see my screen? Yeah, I will share it online. Yep. Today we will see a bit of Python and how exactly you need to use Python and how minimal you can use Python. And there are certain questions which were raised against the project which you guys have to do. So we can see regarding that. And also there is a point on visualization which is mentioned in your project. So a little bit of that also we can see, and we will see the installation of Python, and there are some IDEs which I will try to show so that you can just use that IDEs for doing your project or whatever. And yeah, this is the agenda for today and we'll get started. So to start off with, for Python, if you go into our course information, you can see there are two IDEs. I mean, two ways you can do your Python codings. So one is the Python IDE, which is the default, and the Visual Studio Code. So both are like, it's a general installation. You can just go to that particular link, and based on your PC OS, whether it's Windows or Mac or whatever, you can just download that particular version, and you can just install it. That is the case for both Visual Studio and Python IDE. So for example, if you are working on Python IDE, you can just use your command prompt, and you can just check whether you have installed your Python or something. And if it is there, you can just go into that Python shell. So it will directly take you to the Python shell once you have installed it. And whatever the Python commands you want to try it, you can just try it here. This is like a raw way of doing the coding. I mean, you can just work it on your command prompt and you can just run your code. So this is one way of doing it, but I would suggest you install Visual Studio Code or whatever IDEs you prefer. There are like Atom, PyCharm, Sublime Text. There are a lot of options, but Visual Studio Code has one advantage. I have already installed Visual Studio Code, so if you want to see, you can just go to this particular link which is in the Moodle, and it will automatically direct your PC and tell which version it is, and you can just download and install it. So you don't need to do too much on that. Let me close this Teams forever. Yeah. So once you open Visual Studio Code, and in order to run Python, it's so this is like a explanation given to everyone. So this is like an IDE which supports all most of the programming languages you can type here, whether it's Java, Python, C, C++, whatever you want to type, you can just use this IDE to run and execute your code. Okay. So in case you want to try Python in Visual Studio Code, you can just download it. And after you do that, you go to the extension, which is here in the symbol, and you can just type Python. Okay. So I will share this extension also in Moodle so that you can just download. There will be a lot of Python version, but you can check the downloaded numbers of that particular extension. Okay. So you can just download the Python extension. Also, there is an option for SQLite. Okay. Unfortunately, this SQLite, I don't know why it is not working. It's not working, but there is a SQLite viewer which is there, so that whenever you want to open a database, you can just access it and you can just work on the Python code in parallel. Okay. So these are a couple of extensions which you can install in your Visual Studio and just work on the Python. So to start off with Python, you can just create a new file. Okay, and it will ask for the language. You can just say which language you want to do. You can just say Python, and after you type whatever your code is, you can just run without in, you don't need to save in class.py, but because it will automatically consider that as a Python file, so you don't need to save it, and you can just run whatever code you want and it will just execute it, because I didn't write anything, but we will write. But this is how you can work on Visual Studio Code, and also you can see your database which you have. So this is our database which we had for one of the assignment. You can just have it in parallel. So for example, you are having your database as well as Python code. You can just work on your code in this file and view your database which you created on whatever what is the data and what you have to access it or something like that. So this is one of the advantage which you can use it because of Visual Studio. And for this particular course, we are not focused on Python as such. We are not focused to expect you to learn Python from the basics or something. There are certain uh, limited number of formats or codes or syntax which you can actually use it to access the database using Pythons. Okay, so for example, you can see the slides yesterday, and we can try some example as well. So we can just yep. So so let me so there are some 6 to 7 lines which you need to use it for your database handling in Python. So one is that you should import SQLite 3, okay, which is the database which we are using in our project. If you are using some other database, you can use some other import of that particular. And then we have to say the database is equal to connect dot whatever the database you have, you can just give it here. This is basically we are connecting that particular database which you have. So and then we have to have a cursor which is the pointer. Okay, so we will point to the data. Okay, this is like we are pointing to that particular database. It's kind of storing the address of the database. Then we have cursor dot execute command. Inside this bracket, you need to paste all your SQL queries. Okay, so whatever SQL queries you want to write, you can just write it inside this execute. Okay, and then we will have something like output or whatever. So whatever we executed, so when it where we can save it in a variable called output, and it will just we can have a lot of option like fetch all, fetch one, or if you want to fetch first data or second data or many data, so you can just use it. Then there is something called data.commit. For example, in your Python assignment, there is something called you need to update a match data. Also, you have to delete those some kind of information is there. So for that, if you are doing, you have to use a data.commit. The commit is a command. So you have to use it. Otherwise, whatever data you are updating in your database will not reflect in your database. Okay, data commit is nothing but you are saying So whatever I'm writing in Python, please commit to my database. So that is funda behind it. So these are the different lines, which is, I would say, the mandatory lines in your Python file you have to use in order to access the database. Okay. Apart from that, there are certain lines like print and you have to print it in a row or something like that. So there are some default lines which you can use it using the template. So this is basically for whoever doesn't have any Python experience or any other programming language experience. You can just focus on utilizing this particular set of lines and you can just write your database. So we are giving more focus on your database, what you're doing, and this programming you can just have a little impact or something like that. So in order to have a better clarity, so if you can go to your Python section of your module, so you can see there is the template which is given. So I would say you can just use this particular template for whatever project you are developing also, in addition to, in addition to what you are creating your database. So let me just explain this template in a bit better way. So as you can see, this is a mandatory line. This is the import which we discussed, and this is the database which they are speaking. So instead of having some kind of a database which is in Moodle, when you are accessing your database, you need to give your path, basically where your database is there. And this particular part, it is better if you use it. You can initialize your DB whenever the process is starting from first. For example, I'm having a database having this player and ranking and everything. So I am changing certain information of a player, okay, and I'm saving it in the database. So if I'm using this initialize DB, this is doing nothing but it has an SQL file. So f is a variable and open is just we are opening the file in read mode. Okay. This SQL file will have all the commands which you write, all the create table, insert, and the values which you give into your SQL. So what happens is if you have this function, whenever you try to run this program, the database will be refreshed. It will add the data once again. You get my point? So it is like refreshing the database with the old data again. We are not corrupting or changing the data. When you are testing it, you can use this so that the data which you have already in your database will not be changed or something like that. So this will have all the commands which you want to give into your database, like create table, create whatever table you want, and the insertion of the table and stuff. So that is the purpose of this particular function. Okay, that's why it is called every time whenever the program runs and ends in the main. Okay, it will just initialize the DB. It will just say start from first. Okay, that is one thing. And other thing, I would say you need to have something called input. This also kind of a mandatory, I would say. Input will do nothing but it will get the input from you. Just basically it will say what you want to do with the program or something like that. So for each option there is a condition and as a separate function is there. So whenever a particular function is called, that particular function will run. So if you are not familiar with Python, you can just use this particular template and you can modify your database according to it and write some queries inside it. So we can just do okay, I will try to connect with my local database and just try to execute something. So I had my orders table actually. This only. So I'm just accessing the local database. Okay. So okay. Dun, 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 dun. What is the error actually? Okay, I don't know. Limit is all of a sudden it's not working. So as you can see, I have tried to print all the players of the database. Okay, and if you want to print it in a better way, you can just use a for loop. And one of the most important thing is in Python, you should be careful about the indentation. So for loops and conditions, you should have a one-step indentation of it. So you can just print the players in whatever order you want. So, and one more thing is whenever you are accessing directory in Python, you should add either or you should add an escape character in front of it, so that it will consider that as a raw string and it will try to escape the special characters. For example, if I just keep the directory as it is, it will show me an error like it has some kind of unidentified some code or codec or something like that. So you just be careful with this R, and I would say rest of it is like you can just utilize this limited commands to access your database. So, and you can write this is the part where you have to write like all your inputs. Okay, and one more thing I need to tell. So for example, player name. So I will just try to give as an input like display or something. So here you can just either use normal braces, and you can just put this input parameter with a comma to access as a single string. Instead of, you can have a square bracket and you can just use that particular variable. Okay, instead of, so if you run this particular code, it will ask the player ID we need to display. So we are saying player ID 20. So it will just display the player ID 20 is Fabio Fognini and he's from Italy and this details, whatever it is. So there is a case in your assignment where you need to give an input dynamically so that the program should allocate that input to the SQL and it will run. So in this case, we are saying just the player ID. If you want to add one more condition, like he has to have this kind of a nationality or whatever information you want, you can just put a comma here and you can just add one more parameter which you want to inject into SQL. Okay. And the order should be same as your inputs. For example, you are saying select star from player, where player's nationality is question mark and his ranking is question mark. Okay, this is a condition. So you need to mention, you need to give the input basically in a correct order. A nationality should have the nationality value and the ranking should have the ranking value. So this ordering matters. So you should be a little careful with that. So this is the way which you can give an input to the SQL server through the command. And in case you are, instead of selecting, you are having some kind of update statement. Okay, you have to use db dot that commit command, so that whatever you do it in the database, it will just reflect in the database. Otherwise, if you check the database again, it will show the data is not there. So those two things you have to be little careful. And apart from that, so there is something called yep. So there is something called bokeh visualization. Okay, this is something like instead of showing a raw data like how we saw the codes in Visual Studio, it is like uh, when you are submitting your project basically, so you have to give us some options to check your code, what is the data it is showing. So instead of having the data shown to be in this manner, okay, you can use that visualization, which is kind of a package in Python. You can just install that. I mean, there is some kind of a using pip install, like you can just install that visualization and you can just use it to, I mean, to have a more visual appealing look or something like that. So today I tried to do something using that actually. So you can see it's still a basic code. You can see the SQL which I'm trying to get is the order ID and the price. Okay, you remember in one of our lecture we had the customer and the grocery example which we discussed. So in that I took one of the table. Okay, in that I have order ID, the customer ID, product ID, and the quantity and the price. So these are the data which the database has. So I just try to take only the order ID. So each order and how much is the price for the order, and I took only the top 10 of the orders. Okay, and so you can see this particular line which says plotting import figure and show. Figure is nothing but what is the uh, x-axis and y-axis and what are the details of that particular plot. And show is nothing but you can just show it in a browser. that particular graph. And one more thing is here I used a bar graph, which is having a notation of V bar, and what is the value of x-axis and y-axis, and what is the legend says, and what is the width and color. And it's basically like similar to HTML kind of a code. You just need to, I would say, connect the whatever the Python output comes. So for example, in this case, we have a list of order IDs. For each order, I am saying this is the price. So I am kind of matching the x-axis with the y-axis. So in this way, I will be able to display what is the price of that particular order, and what is the price of that. I mean, what is the price? If you want to change, like you want to display with the customer or something, you can just do it also. So for example, if I run this code, it has to open. Yep. So you can see for the order one, the price is, I don't know what, maybe around 27 or something. So similarly, you can just see for the 10 orders. So this is like a basic example which you can show. For example, in your project, you can just say, uh, for example, you are having some kind of movie database. Okay, you are saying you can check how many movies released per year. So when I'm trying to access 2000, I can see some 100, 200 movies, and in 2001 it has been decreased. So those kind of thing you can just show it in using bokeh visualization. And yeah, so when the meeting ends, we will connect it again. So it's just like we will have a quick break. So sorry for that. So you can just change the limit to like 25 or something, and you can just see it will show for all the 25. Okay. So this is a documentation of that. I will try to include this link also to the Moodle. So you can just see if you can just see how to install it. Just whether you can use pip or other ways to install. You can just install it in your command prompt. Okay, like so how we did for Python, you can just do it for yeah. So you can, after installing, you can just check the version of bokeh as usual. So once you have done it, you can just close your Visual Studio, and you can just open it again, so that the whatever installation you have done outside will reflect. Because sometimes it will not reflect and it will show some errors, and you can just see what are the different graphs. You can do it using bokeh, and this is one of the thing. And for the project, so there are some doubts regarding the project. So for example, whether you need to create all the tables and values using Python or something like that, it's not required. You can just use SQLite and create all the tables for your project, and you can have it as a separate DB file, and you can have a Python file as well separately. And your Python file just has to be a user interface, nothing much. Actually, we have to access your database using Python. So you can create your database using SQLite itself. It's not required you have to create using Python. If you use Python to create, it's still okay, and still you have to have your database separately, because we have to have a database file and the Python file, as well as the commands which you are using to create your SQL database. So three things are required. So whatever way it is feasible for you, you can create it, and it is not mandatory. And How much time we have? 6 minutes. Okay. We can see additional things in the next meeting, maybe. Do you have any doubts or questions till now? Online? And one more thing, if you are trying to install any of this, try to run it as an administrator, whether it's your command prompt or PowerShell or whatever. So try to run as admin, and then you try to install it, because it will ask for some kind of administrative rights or something like that. So that is one of the issue which will be faced. I mean, you can also see the presentation actually, which was taken on Tuesday. You can see so I mean the 24th slide has everything, which is kind of a I would say the needed lines to be in the Python and except DB commit. And you can use this so that you can print your result in a row by row basis. So that is also there. And this is the part which I was discussing earlier. So it's nothing but you can just have all this create and stuff, insert and whatever you have in a separate file, and you can just initialize inside the Python instead of writing all that inside. So that is the part which I was discussing earlier. And as I mentioned, I will just add all the extension which are required for the Visual Studio in the Moodle, so that it will be helpful for I mean, instead of having some other extension, you can have the right extension. Yes, it's gonna end